When we think of what makes Washington a great state, the first thing that comes to mind are its natural assets: tranquil inland waters, lush forests and pristine streams, majestic mountains, and the endless bounty of agricultural lands. As the old real estate adage claims, it's location, location, location. What most of us don't think about is that our location is a prime factor driving our state's economy. With ample deep-water ports, we are a key hub in international trade. And our location on the globe is what makes business boom, fueling everything from the largest manufacturer to the smallest farmer. Per capita, Washington is the most trade-dependent state in the U.S. It's a bold statement, and once you understand that we have a natural strength in the movement of commodities and goods, you begin to see the movement of freight in a new light, and you do see it every day, usually in your rear-view mirror.
This combination of freight flowing in and out of the state has made our economy extremely vibrant. But to keep it vibrant, we have to pay attention to being competitive, and part of being competitive is keeping our transportation costs down.
We're at a crossroads. We have to decide if we're going to compete and be proactive, or if we're going to sit back and let things happen. There are a number of other states that would love to have this business in other parts of the United States.
There always has been the cry for education of the public regarding transportation issues. Well, I've been hearing it for 30 years, and we're doing it. You just never can quite do it enough.
What we've got to do is be able to explain to our citizens that in order to get them from and to their communities, work, leisure time, whatever it happens to be, we have to provide for methods of transportation for the freight of a region so that we're allowed to maintain our quality of life in our communities that we hold so dear.
The good news is that as global trade expands, Washington is in a prime position to benefit economically. But the hard question to answer is, as we look to the future, can our overall freight system handle the capacity?
Anything that we produce, anything that we need, has to come by a truck, a train, a ship, or a plane, and very frequently by a combination of those modes.
Most people don't think about where the shirt they're wearing comes from, where the food they're eating comes from, how it gets to the store. Maybe they think it's manufactured at the store. People don't really personalize how dependent everyone is upon freight transportation.
It's sort of like the classic joke about you ask the kid from New York City where milk comes from, and he says from the grocery store.
Hopefully, you know this pineapple did not grow in Seattle, or the car you drive wasn't built in Yakima. A lot of everyday products come from far-off lands we'll never visit in our lifetimes. Just go into your closet and check out the labels. After 4 outfits, you've traveled about halfway around the world. Most of us only need to go a few blocks to get a latte, but the coffee itself had to travel just a little bit further. From some far-off exotic port, bulk beans were laded onto a container ship. Thousands of miles later, the ship landed stateside and transferred the load to a train. Hundreds of miles later, the bulk load was parceled out to trucks. After the beans were roasted, delivery vans fought through traffic to individual stores. And that's about the time when you walk in, place an order, and are gone in 60 seconds. Food or drink for thought. But each one of these steps is part of Washington's story in the movement of freight. At the local level, it's serving the average consumer and the average business. If consumer products and manufactured goods don't move in a timely fashion, we all pay through our pocketbooks. And in an instant gratification, instant expectation world, the pressure to keep freight moving is ever increasing. That could be everything from petroleum, a #1 commodity, to wines, a specialty product that's homegrown. Washington's freight story began with homegrown products 150 years ago. When rail lines made their way west to port cities like Tacoma and Seattle, the region's destiny began to take shape. But it was the Yukon Gold Rush that cemented the area's future as a place on the move. And since then, it's been a pretty lucrative history.
Our economy here is very much tied to our ability to trade from the early days in the 1850s until today. When I travel to visit our customers overseas, no matter where I am in the world, I can find a Washington apple. And that apple went from a picker in the field to a packer in the warehouse. A trucker then moved it from there. A bank financed the export of those apples. A longshoreman touched those apples as they moved from the truck onto the container and the container onto the ship. And all those people are local. That's the type of economic activity generated by having access to international markets. And that access is created by these ports that we have here in Washington State.
Today, wherever you look in Washington State, the freight business is big business. Bellingham is one of the busiest entry points in the U.S. for Canadian products. The Port of Vancouver, Washington has seen demands for some export commodities tripling in the last 2 years. Longview specializes in non-container break bulk cargo, with volumes soaring. This ship from China is carrying huge wind turbine towers destined for eastern Washington. The Port of Pasco moves millions of dollars of agricultural products into the global marketplace. In fact, as empty import containers return through Washington State from cities like Chicago, Washington crop growers receive a discounted rate on each container they fill, a huge trade benefit. In the big picture, Washington is a prime gateway to booming Asian trade.
Generally, over the last 20 years, trade among Pacific Rim countries has averaged about 10% per year increase.
The largest trading partner and growing exponentially is China. China in this nation, China and the Pacific Northwest. So both the Port of Seattle and Port of Tacoma will have and will continue to have significant growth.
With Boeing, Microsoft, wine producers, and fruit growers here, obviously we're not just talking about imports, we're talking about the competitiveness of our exports as well.
Most of the cargo offloaded from container ships is passing through to destinations across the U.S., somewhere between 65 and 75% as demands ebb and flow. About 50 million tons of waterborne freight move through Washington each year, a figure that communicates little to the average person. But because so much of this state's economy relies on this volume of import-export activity, these numbers may have more impact. From Puget Sound ports alone, the ripple effect from international trade leads to 220,000 jobs statewide, $1.7 billion in wages, $2.8 billion in business revenues, and $234 million in state and local revenues. The most compelling statistic today is that when you add up all the state industries reliant on the efficient movement of products and commodities into the global marketplace, 1 in 3 jobs in the state of Washington is related to international trade. And the economic forecast points to even better days ahead. But are we ready for the predicted surge in trade?
When you look at how this state will be impacted, you have to remember that freight flows like water. It seeks the path of least resistance and lowest cost.
The movement of commerce through this region, which happens to be about 75% discretionary, can go anywhere it wants to go. A big factor is how rapid can you move the vessels to the dock, the containers off and on the rail or road into destination.
That's why the steamship lines come here. That's the only reason they come here. So if they can do it faster in Oakland or Los Angeles or Portland or Vancouver or even somewhere on the East Coast, they'll do it.
While ports like Seattle and Tacoma have heavily invested in infrastructure, they are only the entry point, and their shipping clients make their decisions on how efficient the whole system is.
What concerns us more is the overland connection, particularly roadways. But road and rail links are the obvious destination for all our cargo. Only about 1/5 of our cargo to 1/3 in the Northwest here is bound for local distribution. The rest is going onward.
All of these pieces have to fit together. The weakest link is going to choke the entire system. So when you go back and look at things like the investments made on our docks, the millions of dollars being spent there, If all we have accomplished is we have moved the choke point off the dock and onto the public streets, we haven't really accomplished a lot, and we are still jeopardizing our ability to compete in a global market.
While Washington enjoys the envious position as a prime international port, its own geography is its Achilles heel. Freight movement is confined to a limited number of corridors, and those corridors frequently suffer from overuse, competing uses, or eroding infrastructure that limits capacity. The national rail lines that operate in Washington are restricted by terrain. There are 3 main east-west routes across the state. To the north, Stevens Pass is just a few short years away from reaching absolute capacity with projected freight increases. To the south, along the Columbia, rail lines hug the river, and any increases in capacity pose huge environmental challenges. That leaves Stampede Pass in the middle.
With regard to Stampede Pass, right now the tunnel can only accommodate single-stacked trains. So if we can crown the tunnels on Stampede Pass, we can then, in some respects, almost double the capacity, because then we can run a train that has literally twice as many containers.
Washington's other main rail corridor runs north and south from Vancouver, BC to Portland. The line splits into 2 tracks in central Puget Sound, but demand for rail already is taxing capacity.
We're running many trains along that corridor, BNSF Railway and the Union Pacific Railroad, along with passenger operations, both commuter rail and Amtrak. It is very important. It is double-tracked. It is receiving both public investment to accommodate the higher speeds that passenger operations require. But it's also the focus of considerable investment on the part of our railway to make those improvements necessary to keep the freight moving.
At the local level, 70% of all freight movement in this state ultimately comes down to trucks.
If you go to a store and look around, everything came there in a truck. If you go home at night, everything in your house was in a truck. When you go out to eat, everything there came by. Nothing happens in this country without a truck. And if they stopped running, there would be nothing in the stores. You couldn't go to Starbucks for a cup of coffee. So they're essential lifeblood of this economy, and if trucks don't run smoothly, we all pay for that. For 20 years, we've had substantial increase in population, and we're in for gridlock. We're paying our drivers to sit in a truck and not do any productive work. We put a location in Mount Lake Terrace to cover the north end of Seattle because you can't get there from here during the day. You just can't. So we have the added expense of a terminal that we used to do it out of the main terminal here in Auburn, and can't do it anymore because traffic is awful.
Main freeway corridors reach choke points every day. Each year, average truck run times increase, burning more fuel, adding more air pollution. Annually, the cumulative added operating expenses for truck lines runs into millions and millions of dollars, costs that ultimately are passed on to consumers. How bad can doing business by truck get in the Seattle-Tacoma-Everett corridor?
We can deliver as timely from Yakima to King County as a local delivery truck can load product and deliver it in King County. And we all know the answer why. Anybody that's tried to drive from the Kent Valley or from Tacoma 3 o'clock in the afternoon northbound to Kirkland or Bellevue knows that it can literally take hours to drive 30, 40 miles. The cost for driving to King County is the same whether it's stored in Yakima or whether we deliver it to a local warehouse in King County.
By using larger capacity trucks requiring less deliveries, Haney's solution actually reduces overall truck traffic in King County. When Boeing made a decision to pull part of its operation out of Seattle, it cited congested transportation corridors as a major factor. Now, as the region looks to a bright new future with the advent of the 787, the competitive new plane dictates new challenges.
The choice to move things out of the country and to build airplanes in a different fashion have cost us other transportation woes here in the Puget Sound. You know, we've become more of a globally logistic company where now we've got parts not only coming from all over the U.S., but from all over the world.
Virtually every major company today operates on a cost-cutting principle called lean manufacturing, or just-in-time delivery. Parts and supplies are not stored. They arrive the day they are needed.
The challenges have grown because the size of the parts have gotten bigger, so the challenges to move them have gotten greater. Logistically, the way the Boeing's set up in the Puget Sound area here, the freeways and the highways that run between our plants essentially become the conveyor belts to how we get our parts to the two primes to assemble our airplanes. Working hand in hand with not only the state agencies, but all of the city of Seattle and Tukwila and Auburn and Everett, all of those agencies are all involved in making this a successful move. And if everybody doesn't come together and if we don't do a good job of communicating with each other, then we fail.
The tension surrounding every community in Washington state is balancing the benefits of freight mobility with the local quality of life. Bellingham prospers from Canadian export businesses locating in the county.
Well, we in Bellingham and in Whatcom County do have a lot of business activity that directly relates to Canada. The bulk of the goods coming through from Canada are not destined for Whatcom County. There are thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of trucks per month and year that come through this border crossing. That has noise impacts, that has air pollution impacts, and it has congestion impacts, which affects everyone in the community. What we are trying to do is ensure that all those interests are taken into consideration and realistically and effectively addressed, so that the burden for a throughput community does not exceed the benefit of having a robust transportation system.
The Kent-Auburn Valley is the second largest distribution center on the West Coast, with commerce flowing 24 hours a day.
We are at the center of the beating industrial heart of the whole entire region, right in between the two ports of Tacoma and Seattle. When one of the ships comes into the port, that ship will have over 6,200 containers on it. What that means is, in the way of trains, that's 30 trains. That's 6,200 trucks. If we had no additional commuters for the next 5 years, our traffic problems would increase steadily because of the fact that our two ports are going to require such an increased need of trucks and trains.
Long overdue in the Kent-Auburn Valley is the widening of Highway 167 and finally connecting the freeway to Tacoma to improve port access. The Yakima Valley moves a majority of its local produce by truck, but the city of Yakima's greatest challenge is a projected increase in rail activity.
We know our roads are at capacity, many of them for freight, and so I do believe that getting freight moving through our community via rail is going to have a huge impact on our community. When the railroad said they were going away, we built our fire station just east of the tracks and our new police station as well. And so it is difficult when the trains go through town to react.
The tracks literally divide the city in half. When freight rolls through town, all crosstown traffic comes to a halt, and that includes emergency vehicles.
So we do have some freight mobility requests, and that's for 2 underpasses to get rid of some of the at-grade crossings within our jurisdiction.
Grade separation projects are an obvious way to increase freight mobility. Freight trains can operate through corridors at a higher rate of speed, and all street traffic, both trucks and motorists, avoid a railroad crossing wait. Recognizing the importance of keeping freight moving in every transportation corridor, the Washington State Legislature created the Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Board in 1998.
The agency was created bringing together both the public and the private sector. The railroads, the shipping lines, the ports, and the truckers are all involved in the FMSIB decision-making program. We also have the cities, the counties, and the DOT at the table, and by agreement, everyone then determines where the choke points are, where the most critical needs are, and whether these solutions that are proposed are actually going to work and make a difference in the movement of freight and cargo around our state.
Funding transportation projects currently is one of Washington State's greatest challenges. This list of freight mobility projects stands as a long-term strategic plan, ensuring that the wisest possible investments can be made as scarce dollars are allocated.
All of the freight mobility projects are partnership projects. And for every one of our projects, the public sector puts in money, but so does the private sector. And for every dollar that the Freight Mobility Board puts into these projects, we are actually leveraging about $4 for every one of our dollars, which is a very good investment of public resources.
Any project or any facility, and whether it be a road or a grade crossing, which assists in the rapid and effective movement of freight, assists every other mode of transportation also. If we have facilities that allow trucks and or trains to move more quickly and more efficiently, that allows people who are in cars to move more efficiently at the same time. So while the focus of the Freight Mobility Board is on freight, the benefits from the movement of freight extend to everyone in the state, regardless of what mode they choose to travel, and everyone in the state, regardless of what business they're in or how they get their livelihood.
Improving freight mobility has a direct correlation to growing good jobs, strengthening local business and industry, and bolstering the overall state economy.
One thing the public sector can do is illustrate by what it says as well as what it does to focus on the importance of freight transportation and its integral relationship to the state's economy.
There are not enough dollars to fund all of the transportation things that people would like. When you come down to what your priorities are, obviously freight has to be at the top of that list. It's difficult to try to foresee what the cost would be to our region if we did nothing. The idea of not taking this seriously, of not investing in our freight transportation network, is totally against everything that we have worked for as a country. So I don't see us not competing, but I think we do need a wake-up call, and I do think we need to say, this is important. I don't want to see us fall behind. I want to see us remain a strong, competitive world leader in freight movement and in goods production.